Some of the most powerful men in world football being dragged out of a five-star hotel, white bed sheets thrown over their faces to hide from the cameras, police moving through the lobby, dawn in Zurich. This is the morning the most loved game on earth came apart. But the strangest part, one ticket to a single match, priced like a luxury home, a host nation that outspent entire countries, an insider who wore a wire on his own friends, and a non-profit that swallowed every scandal and only grew larger. This is no ordinary sports story and no ordinary scandal because the World Cup isn't really a tournament, not as a business, it's a toll booth built around the one thing no one can put a price on: emotion. Cities pay to host it, broadcasters pay to show it, sponsors pay to stand beside it, and the supporters pay to get in. So, forget the ball for a moment. The real story was never the game, it was always the money. How does a non profit make $13 billion? Why would any country spend a national fortune for a few weeks of football? And how did the people in charge of it all end up under arrest at dawn while the game itself never missed a beat? To understand all of it, the story has to begin half a century ago. 1974. A villa on a quiet street in Switzerland. Inside, there's a tiny staff and a treasury holding next to nothing. A new president walks through the door for the very first time. He opens the books and finds about $20. His name was João Havelange. He was Brazilian, a former Olympic swimmer, a businessman, and the first man from outside Europe ever to run world football. So, how did he win the job? For 3 years, he traveled 86 countries: Africa, Asia, Central America, places no FIFA president had ever bothered to visit, and everywhere. He made the same promise: back me, and the World Cup will grow. More places for their teams, matches on their own soil. Dozens of smaller football nations backed him, and he won. But he'd promised something FIFA couldn't afford. By 1978, it was nearly broke. Adidas had to step in and underwrite the bills just to keep the tournament alive. So Havelange looked again at this sport, played on every continent, followed the world over, and he saw what no one before him had seen: not a game, a product, maybe the most valuable product in all of entertainment, one that every network on earth would pay to broadcast, and every corporation would pay to sit beside. He just needed someone to sell it. So he found Horst Dassler, the heir to the Adidas empire. Together, they built a company with one job: to buy the rights to the World Cup and sell them to the world for far more. Coca-Cola signed, Visa followed, the money began to move. Havelange had built the blueprint, and every president after him would follow it exactly. Sepp Blatter, then Gianni Infantino. The faces changed, the model never did. Each one did the same thing: grow the tournament, more teams, more games, more money. 16 teams became 24, then 32, and now 48. 104 matches, the largest tournament the sport has ever seen, and every new team brings fresh games to broadcast and fresh sponsors to court. Now consider one number. FIFA today has more member nations than the United Nations, 211 of them. Each one gets a vote, each one gets funding, and each one has a reason to keep this growing. So the money multiplied like nothing else in entertainment. When Havelange arrived, there had been almost nothing. By the time he walked away in 1998, it was worth billions. By today, that 4 year cycle pulls in a projected $13 billion, run as a non-profit, registered in Switzerland, where that status comes with very generous tax treatment. Havelange saw it all coming, right from the start, and near the end of his life. He said so himself. I found an old house and $20 in the kitty. On the day I departed, I left property and contracts worth over $4 billion. And then 5 more words. Not too bad, I'd say. $20 to 4 billion, and that was only the beginning. So, one question remains. Where does all that money actually come from? From three places: broadcasting, sponsors, and the fans. Broadcasting is the giant networks in more than 200 territories, paying billions for the right to show the games. And that cost never vanishes. It's folded into cable packages, then subscriptions, then the monthly bills of millions of households who may never tune in even once. Then come the sponsors. For this World Cup, the state oil company of Saudi Arabia signed on as a global partner in a deal reported near $400 million. A fossil fuel giant, sharing the stage with Coca Cola and Adidas. And then there's the part the fans actually touch: the ticket. For the first time in World Cup history, FIFA used dynamic pricing, prices that rise and fall with demand, exactly like airline seats. The cheapest tickets opened at $60, but those were a tiny pool, reserved for loyal fans. For everyone else, the prices climbed and climbed. By the final, the best seats on FIFA's own portal hit nearly $33,000. That's the official price. Then came resale. On FIFA's own resale market, one seat for the final appeared with an asking price of $11.5 million for a single ticket. And on every resale, FIFA takes a cut: 15% from the buyer, 15% from the seller. So when one ticket changes hands, FIFA gets paid twice: broadcasting, sponsors, tickets, resale. The money poured in from every direction at once. A near bankrupt little federation had become one of the most profitable enterprises on the planet. And for years, that looked like nothing but a triumph. But beneath the surface, the first fractures were already forming. The first fracture: the cost of hosting. In 2022, the World Cup went to Qatar, a desert state smaller than Connecticut, with almost no football history and almost unlimited money. To be ready, Qatar spent an estimated $220 billion, 8 stadiums, most built from scratch, a new metro line, a new airport, and Lusail, an entire city, rising out of the desert, just to host the final. For perspective, Germany hosted in 2006 for around 4 billion. Qatar spent roughly 50 times more, by far the most expensive event in human history. And it wasn't only money that was spent. That tournament was built by migrant labor, workers from Nepal, from India, from Bangladesh. The Guardian counted at least 6,500 migrant worker deaths in Qatar across the decade of building, a number the Qatari government disputes. And through all of it, FIFA collected a record $7.5 billion. Its president called it the best World Cup ever. The best ever, he said, but the bill for it lands on someone else entirely. Because when a country hosts the World Cup, that country covers the costs: stadiums, transport, security, policing. The host pays, and the revenue: broadcast money, ticket money, sponsor money, nearly every cent goes back to FIFA. And these costs aren't abstract, they're public. For this tournament, the United States government committed $625 million in security alone across 11 host cities, all taxpayer money. Up in Canada, the Independent Budget Office puts the public bill above $1 billion, around $82 million, for every single game. And the contracts behind these deals, often sealed. A city can pour hundreds of millions of dollars of public money into this and never be allowed to read the terms. And still, the line of cities never gets shorter because FIFA doesn't chase hosts. Hosts chase FIFA. They bid against each other, promising bigger stadiums and tighter security until the bidding itself drives the price even higher. The fans fill the seats, the taxpayers fund the ground, and the money runs one way, inward. For decades, it ran like a perfect machine, and then it shattered. To understand how it all unraveled, meet the most unlikely man in this entire story, Chuck Blazer, an American, a suburban soccer dad from New York, who started out coaching his son's youth team and then worked his way all the way into the inner circle of the global game. His personal travel blog showed him with Putin, with Mandela, with Miss Universe. At his peak, Blazer held a seat on football's top committee. He helped bring the sport to America, and he lived like a king, 2 apartments in Trump Tower in Manhattan, one for himself at $18,000 a month, and a second apartment down the hall, rented purely for his cats. Behind his back, they had a nickname for him, Mr. 10%, for the cut he skimmed off every deal he touched. But Blazer had a problem. For years, he hadn't paid his taxes, and in 2011, on a New York sidewalk, the FBI and the IRS caught up with him. They gave him a choice: go to prison or help them bring down FIFA. Blazer chose to cooperate, and what he did next is almost too strange to believe. Federal agents hid a recording device inside a keychain, and Chuck Blazer, trusted at the highest level of the game, carried it into private meetings with the people who trusted him most. At the 2012 London Olympics, it captured the most senior figures in the sport speaking freely, with no idea that the friend across the table was recording every word for the FBI. Piece by piece, he handed Washington everything it needed to take apart the organization he had helped build. And on one morning in May 2015, they finally used it. The morning of May 27th, 2015, Zurich, the Bor-o-Lak Hotel, 5 stars, FIFA's leaders had gathered there for their annual meeting. And this time, Swiss police were waiting, acting on a request from the United States. They arrested 7 of them before the day had even begun. Then the bedsheets appeared, raised high across the lobby, as the bosses of the game were marched out beneath them, shielded from the lenses waiting outside. In total, 14 people were charged. The United States laid it all out in a 47-count indictment. The charge: racketeering, the same law built to bring down the mafia, more than $150 million in bribes and kickbacks, stretching back more than 2 decades. The Attorney General said it spanned 2 generations of football officials. This was not one bad apple. Corruption, the case argued, ran through the entire organization, like a current in the wiring. The richest sport on the planet, branded inside a U.S. courtroom, a criminal enterprise. Surely, that had to be the end of it. But it wasn't. Days before the raid, Sepp Blatter had been re-elected president for a 5th term. Days after, he was gone, banned from football for years, and later, FIFA itself found that he and 2 others had quietly handed themselves $80 million in pay and bonuses. And Havelange, remember the company he built at the very start? The one with a single job, selling the World Cup to the world years later? The courts forced the truth into the light. That same company had been quietly funneling money straight back to the top, around 41 million Swiss francs, in secret payments to Havelange and his own son-in-law. The empire had been feeding its founder all along. He was never punished. He gave up his final honorary title just days before they could strip it away. And he died at 100 years old, a free man. Meanwhile, the players, the teams chasing the trophy, split $871 million in prize money. Out of around $9 billion the tournament brings in, about 10 cents on every dollar. The leaders were swept away. But the real shock, the system they built, never even paused, because the scandal didn't slow the money down. It sped it up. In the decade after the biggest corruption case in the history of sport, FIFA's revenue more than doubled from the last World Cup to this one. This cycle now set to clear $13 billion, and the reserves still run into the billions. And right now, as all of this sits in the public record, the biggest World Cup ever is being played across North America. 48 teams, 3 nations, the passion is real. It always has been. A kid kicking a ball down a dusty street, a family crowded around a single screen, 60,000 voices shaking a stadium until it trembles. None of that is staged, and none of it ever will be. But behind every goal, behind every anthem, there is a trail. From a cable bill, through a city's budget, past a pricing algorithm, into the accounts of an organization that carried almost none of the risk and kept almost all of the reward. 50 years ago, a man found $20 in a drawer and built a toll booth around the world's most beloved game. The men who ran it were arrested. The game they monetized is bigger than ever. Every match, a fresh ticket, every fan, a fresh fee, every host nation, another stretch of road, paying for the privilege of carrying the traffic. The game is beautiful. That is exactly why it's worth so much. And now, the trail is clear. Follow the money, see the system. If you like this video, subscribe to Magnifico Mint and hit that like button, and I will see you in the next one.